Hello and welcome to the 210th episode of the Board Game Barrage podcast, a podcast all about board games, the latest hotness, and how to have fun with your friends, even when you're losing. I am joined by my friends, Neelan and Mark. Say hello.
Hey.
Hello.
How are we all feeling today? Perhaps patriotic?
A little bit, yeah. Fun little side note, I am now officially American.
Oh, say, can you
see
You
by
had to sing
the
that, right?
dawn's early light?
Nope. It sounds like you didn't have to sing that. You did
It
not
is
have
light.
to
It
sing
is
that
light.
because you would have been rejected.
Something bombs in the air and the...
But seriously,
Not-
congratulations. I mean, that's
Thank
cool.
Yeah,
That's-
very cool.
Yeah, no. It was cool. Being there, doing the ceremony, saying the oath, it was a whole thing.
You basically like stand in a room and then pledge allegiance, basically.
Yeah, they do it outside now for COVID, but so
Yeah.
just like in the courtyard outside the building. But like, yeah, you're all lined up. You all stand in a group. You have an officer like saying the oath, and then everyone repeats it, and then get your documents, get your green card punched and destroyed, and welcome to America.
So, in terms of documentation, what changes? This is a very technical question, but just
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, the interesting thing is that like my green card was taken away from me.
right.
What I have now is my naturalization certificate, which is not, I believe, legal documentation to allow me to like leave or re-enter the country.
Okay.
But I now can apply for a passport is the thing. So
I see.
yeah.
Though I am half convinced you did this to reduce my joke repertoire, which is now
Yeah.
reduced by at least 50%.
Exactly. I think most of the jabs in me are about not being American, so long to that.
Today, our featured topic is all about power. That is actions, moves, setups that make you feel powerful in a board game, what that means, what it feels like, and some of the best examples that we have. But before we do that, we are going to talk about the board games that we have been playing. We are going to kick it off with a BGB classic, Biblios 2, Electric Biblios, Quill and Parchment, and then I will take us through a newer Euro game, Cryo, and Neelan is going to finish us off with the discussion of Origins, Burst Builders. So Mark, why don't you kick us off? And if nothing else, we're at least grateful that this isn't just Biblios that you're telling us about. It is in the Biblios shared universe.
That's correct. That's correct. So, in honor of our top 50 episodes and my number one game of all time, I got a chance to play the latest game in the aforementioned Biblios universe, Biblios Quill and Parchment. This is
These guys have pens?
You have dry erase markers. So
No, the monks.
I would say the evolution of pens.
The monks have pens. They have quills.
Oh, yeah, they have quills and parchment. It's right
Okay.
there in the title. Why are you asking questions?
I'm sorry.
This is the Biblios entrant into the roll and write genre. Now, you might think that because I love Biblios so much, I'd be predisposed to liking this, but I don't believe that that is the case. In fact, my experience with the other games under the Biblios umbrella, like Biblios Dice, have been quite disappointing. I am not a fan of Biblios Dice whatsoever. So I wasn't chomping at the bit to get or play Biblios Quill and Parchment, but I ended up trading for it during PAX. And then in chatting with some of the folks from Shut Up and Sit Down, they were actually speaking quite highly of it. So I moved it up to the top of my games to play pile. In Biblios Quill and Parchment, you'll start with a handful of dice that represent a number of different things you can accomplish or acquire on your personal dry erase board. A couple of dice are going to give you gold. A couple of dice will move you up tracks representing the 5 colors of dice, 5 suits of dice.
I'm just confused because it sounds like what you're saying is that this version of Biblios has broken the cardinal rule of Biblios, which is that you never roll the dice.
Well, you never roll some dice in this. There are unrollable dice. Don't worry about it.
Okay.
See, that's the problem with Biblios dice, where there were no unrollable dice, and that's where I failed.
So as long as they have some unrollable dice.
Yes, there is a
cool.
quantity of dice in Biblios Quill and Parchment that is unrollable, so don't worry about it. So I mentioned you have some dice that give you gold, some dice that move you up the 5 colors of the unrollable dice, and you have another dice which moves you along this monk track, which will give you bonuses depending on how far you move along it. So like many other roll and write games, you'll get 2 rerolls, sort of Yahtzee style, but the rerolls in Biblios, Quill and Parchment are handled with a bit of a twist. You can choose to either reroll all your dice or just one. So you can't say, oh, I like these dice, I'm going to keep them, reroll the rest. You can either choose to reroll a single die of the ones you've rolled or reroll the entire lot. So that's a sort of a twist on the Yahtzee style of rerolling that I thought was interesting. So you're rolling the dice, acquiring gold, moving up the tracks, and then also along the monk track until and this all happens very quickly because the entire game plays in about 20 minutes. You get to the second phase of the game. So yes, in addition to retaining the unrollable dice, it does retain the 2 phases as well. So in this phase, in the second phase, the dice are rolled in advance. So instead of having these personal dice, they're rolled in advance, and you're going to use the money you acquired in the first half to bid on these dice that have been rolled in advance. And so you're using the money in a blind bid fashion. So in the first half of the game, you rolled these gold dice, you've acquired gold, and then you're going to secretly write a number down, how much gold you want to bid. And then whoever bids the highest gets the first pick of these dice that have been pre-rolled, second gets the next pick, and so on. Then you'll use the dice that you bought in the same way you used them when you rolled them in the first half. So you're, instead of rolling dice and being able to manipulate them in that way, you're buying these lots of dice and you're using them in the same fashion. So it's not a whole reinvention of how the game is played. But in addition now, there is one new die that you can acquire. And if you acquire that die, it allows you to manipulate these unrollable dice. So you have all of the original Biblios, you have the same 5 colors of dice that are not rolled, but you can acquire this one die to adjust these unrollable dice. When the game ends, whoever's highest along each suit, so the entire time you've been moving along like the red track and the green track, all these tracks being associated with the unrolled dice. So whoever's highest along each color gets 3 times the value of whatever that die is. So if the green die has been manipulated up to the value of 6, and you're the highest along the green track, you get 3 times 6. You get 18 points. So whoever's the highest along the track gets 3 times, second highest gets 2 times, and whoever's the lowest along the track gets just the value of the die. Biblios, Quill, and Parchment is certainly not challenging Biblios for my favorite game of all time, but it might be my favorite roll and write currently, I think. Though frankly, that's not saying that much, as I'm only lukewarm as far as the roll and write genre in general. I did like how the game had 2 phases, of course I did, and each felt somewhat different, going from the dice rolling to the sort of push your luck blind bid. I also appreciate how fast it plays and the fact that there is some level of interactivity, as you want to keep an eye on how far along the different tracks each person is and how much gold they have remaining in order to figure out how much you want to bid. If you're a fan of the roll and write genre, I think I can give Biblios, Quill, and Parchment an unequivocal recommendation. Same with if you're only so-so about those kind of games. But if you dislike roll and writes, I don't think this is going to change your mind, and I don't think this is a game that you would enjoy.
I think one of the things, it's funny, I asked you a bunch of dumb questions about it, but I've actually played the game. So who's the dummy now? I think it had the same feeling of stupidity that I got in a game of Biblios, which is that second half starts and you're like, well, I've certainly myself. I didn't save enough money at all for this auction that's about to happen. And it isn't on rails in the sense that everyone is going to be close. You could be in a much, much worse position going into that second half of the game, which I consider to be a positive. The negative for me is that for some reason that first half of the game felt almost like a preparatory setup phase for what was the actual game, which is the second half. And I actually don't feel that way when I'm playing Biblios. It feels like sort of 2 distinct mini games that are pretty hyper-connected.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think to your point about being in a different spot, being in different situations when that second half rolls around, I think that's true. I think, however, the one area where you could be quite far apart from your opponents would be the amount of gold because, the dice are... But in terms of how far along you are up the tracks, you're going to have the same number of movements as everybody else. So it's not like one person's going to have a bunch of movement up the tracks and other players are not. But you will be quite different in terms of how far you are along different tracks.
You're saying essentially it doesn't matter how much money you have because you're going to get roughly the same amount of actions with the dice that you acquire with that money?
Well, yes. And also in the first half, you're rolling the track dice. So everybody's going to get the same number of track movements.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But yeah, I take your point for sure. And so, yes, I agree that certainly the first half does feel preparatory. It doesn't necessarily feel like a complete just setup phase because you are moving up these tracks. So there is some of the gameplay that's in that first half. But I get your point for sure. Certainly.
I think that specific nature of it, where the first half sets up very heavily for the second half. I mean, that's the thing I like about Biblios. And in some ways, that's the strongest part of Quill and Parchment. And in some ways, also the weakest part for me. I'm going to be maybe a little bit of a dissenting voice here, which is weird, given that I like roll and writes more than most. Or maybe not that weird, I guess. But I kind of felt like throughout the second half, even if I wasn't actively bidding, there were always dice lots that were relatively high value to me, which is very distinct from Biblios, for example, where you have to be winning auctions to do well in Biblios. I kind of felt like I could get away with not really worrying about the auction and still kind of doing okay. And then you add to that the first half feels a little bit, like as Kellen was saying, kind of not inconsequential, but rote, I guess. The first half feels the most generic roll and write, and the second half should be the most interesting part of it, but I found the decisions less meaningful. So I don't know. On balance, I kind of was a little bit on it. I kind of thought it was fine. It was good, but not amazing.
Yeah, I get that argument about the second half. I do think that because no matter how low you bid, you're going to get a lot. And generally, you're going to be able to do something with those dice. And I agree that the bidding is not as consequential. I think with a couple repeated plays, there are some factors, and again, it's just dice rolling. So there's no auction lot the way that Biblios has, where it's been seeded, where okay, I know I put a high blue card in here, so I know I should save some money for it.
Right.
Every time you roll a dice, it's a randomly assorted, like a lot of things. But the importance of winning the dice manipulation die is interesting. But I think your arguments are certainly valid. And again, I can't imagine this would crack my top 50, but in terms of my favorite roll and write, this might be it. But again, that's just not a genre that I'm super fond of. And for me, it was quite important that this game start to finish is like 30 minutes
totally
top. So it's like, yeah, it's even if you don't like it, it's going to be done soon. And if you do like it, you can run it back really, really quick. So.
And I think even just the nature of having two phases makes it pretty distinct as roll and writes go anyway. Sure. So, it's neat for sure.
And that is Biblios, Quill, and Parchment.
I just want to say that having multiple phases as one of the reasons you really like a game is absurd. Right? We could write on the back of the box 7 phases, and like it's 2 is better than 7 is better than 2.
It's specifically that the game changes, right? It's like
that's not what he said. He said it has multiple phases.
Yeah, as long as it's written in the rulebook as phases, I'm a sucker for it. I don't care. Just call them phases instead of turns, and I'll be
as many phases as possible. Well, that segues not at all to the game that I'm going to be talking about, which is a new-ish worker placement game from Z-Man Games called Cryo, and I am very excited to talk about it. This is a beautiful science fiction-themed worker placement game that start to finish, no lie, less than 90 minutes. Boom. We're already in heaven. All you can do in Cryo is 2 things. You can place a ship on a worker placement spot, or you can recall all of your ships back to your base. That's it. What makes the worker placement kind of novel is that the places that you place on have adjacent actions. And so you actually place a ship down that blocks that spot, but it's actually connected to 2 or 3 or 4 other actions. So you may be blocking multiple actions from other players, and you may be blocking sort of 1/2 to 1 action. You are doing some of the bog standard worker placement things, collecting resources like crystals and organics and tech and wild. You are getting survivors. So the entire thematic thrust here is that you're on an ice planet. I think that might be where the Cryo comes from. And you are trying to dig into tunnels, but for some reason you are all a part of the same colony, but now you hate each other, and you are trying to only get your people as deep as you can. So that worker placement part, you have 3 workers only, you never get more workers, is combined really lovingly with a recall system where you recall 1, 2, or 3 if you've taken 3 place ship actions, and you are putting those ships back into your station. And your station has 6 different places for there to be sort of actions that happen as you recall them. So 6 different bays that you are slotting your ships back into. And you will have had to create these upgrade paths within your space station. So the easiest one is the one on the left, which you go to a worker placement spot and then you get a 1 crystal little chit or a 2 crystal little chit or organic chit. And then every time you recall a ship back to that bay, boom, you get that for free. Wow, that's awesome. So you're looking around the board and you're like, okay, what's the best thing? Because some of the chits are this or that. Some of the chits are two things. Some of the chits are one kind of better thing. And then the other bays have different actions associated with them. Some of them, the cost for the recall action is what you set in order to get a different type of benefit. Some of them are completely custom, so you submit the top and the bottom. So, this or that for two of this other thing. So you are building out what you are able to do every time that you recall. This system is awesome. It's very fun. There are incidents that allow you to blow up other people's rescue pods that allow you to prevent them from scoring victory points. The main thrust of how you score points is launching them down into these caverns where you are getting 2 victory points per pod that you put down there. You are getting area majority for each planet, a first and a second place score. And then the last and best thing, multi-use cards. Okay, well, why the are we talking about 2 phases when we could be talking about multi-use cards? Each card that you acquire can be used to upgrade your entire production, give you a special ongoing benefit. Each one can be used as a vehicle to store the rescue pods that you're going to be launching downward. Each card can be used to give you an end-of-game victory condition, and each card can be scrapped for just resources. And what's really devastating is that you do not have enough time to do all of these things. You are not going to be upgrading 3 times and having 3 vehicles. The game does not allow you to. And I would say the last thing before we start talking about this, because Neil and Christina and I played this, is the arc of the game is quite different from modern engine building Euros. It is not the case where you are going to get everything that you want to do done. It's more about getting enough runs in. And you're not really progressing or building outward. You're just trying to get it done faster than everyone else. And you go through that process maybe 1, maybe 2, maybe 3 times. The puzzle of it is much smaller. And I would say that needs to be sort of lauded and appreciated because it's not 17 Sudoku puzzles. There's just one puzzle that is quite fun as you sort of jostle with the players that you're playing with. Neelan, what did you think of Cryo?
I thought it was lovely. I think it's a realm of Eurogame that doesn't really exist that much anymore, which is like this clean, middleweight, breezy Euro that just felt really, really quick. We commented on this multiple times. Your turn is put a thing out, do a thing. And often, if you have a good idea what your next couple of turns is, they just breeze around. You're taking like 5 turns in ultra quick succession. And then the game's over before you know it. Like you kind of mentioned that not everyone will get all their things done. I will say, in fact, Christina and I absolutely were on the verge of wanting to get something very crucial done right as the game ended. Because like there's this very careful deliberation where you can be the person to end the game immediately if the timing lines up right, which is, again, in a world of, everyone finishes the round and then takes one more round is really novel. Like, you just get cheated out of what feels like your ultimate resolution of your goals. I think that was lovely. It just kind of felt really tense as the end of the game was rolling up in a way that I really dug. I do think that the actual mechanics of what you're doing are going to seem simplistic to a lot of people. And I think you would agree with me here, Kellen, that the theme actually does a lot of heavy lifting. For someone that loves thematic games, and I wouldn't say that like the theme itself is not like this overly engrossing story type thing, but it makes the game feel better. Like you're imagining that the pods are your people, and it's sad when they get blown up because it feels a little bit more like, oh man, I needed that. Like there's a weight to it. The production is lovely, sending the drones out, bringing them back, launching vehicles. It all just feels right, even though the systems are not necessarily something you've never seen before. It all comes together, I think, super, super cleanly. I thought it was great.
Yes.
So I'm looking at the pictures of the game on BGG, and I've got just 2 questions. It sounds great, but just 2 concerns that pop up just by these images. One is, I noticed there's quite a bit of pieces.
Yes, it's very bitty.
Is it fiddly?
It's pretty annoying to set up.
Yeah.
I set it up before Neelan got there. That's why Neelan loves it so much. But no, and I think that that's both a blessing and a curse, right? Because I often get pushed back to my gaming taste for like, no, I love my Plano boxes. I love sorting this game into 1,000 different plastic baggies. What do you mean? I love custom inserts. And I think Cryo would give you that opportunity. You really do feel like it is fun to play with the bits. I will not lie to you.
The other thing that sort of concerns me, and this is just a personal taste thing, but one thing I don't really like in games where you have player powers is I'm looking at the upgrade portion of these multi-use cards, and there's a lot of little writing there.
Yeah.
And it's not about the tininess of the writing. It's the fact that like you acquire these player powers and it's just like, okay, my power is, and then there's like a paragraph.
Yeah.
Sure.
So does that, first of all, I guess, is there interaction? Because if there's a game with interaction and yet I have to know the player powers and they're like each a paragraph long, or these like just things that I can't pick up on a glance, that's sort of is something that maybe not concerns me, but would put me off a little bit. Is there any of that? So I'm looking at an example here on BGG, and the player's board has 3 player powers, and each player power is like a paragraph long. A small paragraph, to be fair, but like...
So there are a couple things. The multi-use deck has way more of the same card repeated than you would want. That's actually one of the things I would like squint at just a little bit.
Yeah.
And the other thing is the powers aren't so insane as to like, it's not Chudiak-esque. You know, when I said multi-use cards and, you know, you got real excited like in your eyes, you know, that was just to sort of one up your phases. But in general, I would say that like making a more wild and varied deck would be what I would ask for Cryo 2.
Yeah.
And then even still, some of the powers, Christina got a power that literally allowed her to cheat death, which was the fun part where you get to blow people up with the events. And it was just the opposite of fun. Literally, the card was anti-fun. My entire premise of my game was to trigger events to blow them up. And she just kept going bloop and moving over with this power. I was like, this isn't a fun power. Who made this power? The designers did.
I also think that you're not, you know, over the course of the game, I would say each player is probably going to get 1 or 2 of those, and some of those will likely be repeats, as Kellen said. So yeah, it's definitely not like an insurmountable amount of like reading. It felt very much like, oh, Kellen was the guy that was going to benefit off scouting. Christina was the person that was going to benefit off of this, and so on. Like, it was very easy to intuit what everyone's thing was by the time they got it.
I am eager to play Cryo more times. I will probably bring it to Dice Tower West. It fits in like a relatively good length, and I feel like it is something that is lacking from our modern Eurogame discourse. That is Cryo by Z-Man Games.
Can we also acknowledge that Callan is saying it weird?
Neelan?
I am going to be talking about Origins: First Builders. This is by Adam Kopinski, who is a Polish designer who is a little bit more familiar as one of the Awakened Realms designers. So he's had a hand in games like Lords of Hellas, Nemesis. So this feels a little bit of a departure from those very thematic heavy miniatures games. Origins is a Euro dice worker placement game about, thematically, it's about building your civilization. The conceit is that alien motherships have landed, and this is what kickstarts each of your little ancient civilizations. And what you can do as one of your main actions in the game is send your dice workers to the motherships. Now, each of the motherships, and there's 5 of them, and there are different colors, each of them is associated with different worker placement spots. And each of them has a dial that is numbered from 1 to 6 for each of the sides of the dice. And your die has to be of a equal to or higher value than that mothership's value when you visit it. You can buff its value temporarily with a resource, but most of the time you're going to want to be matching or exceeding that value. You take the actions. If you're matching the color of the die, you're also going to get a little bonus action, and then you bump that dial 1 notch. So by taking that action, you make it harder for every subsequent player, which is, I would say, the core key of the interaction in this game. It is not a worker placement game where worker placement spots strictly get blocked, but by timing your actions at the appropriate time and by bumping dice when you need to, you can cut off people's ability to take actions. And all of their dice are in full view, and there's not that many of them. Like, typically you have like 3 or 4 in your turn, so you might see, oh, Dean's got this number 4 die that he's very eager to use in his turn, so I'll make sure that that dial is a little bit out of reach on my turn. You can double down on this a little bit, because one of the things I thought was fun in this that we didn't really utilize as much as we should have in either of the games I played. There are these tokens that let you spend them once a turn to take 2 actions. So you can really double and twist that knife a little bit sometimes by sort of taking an action once or twice and then really notching up those dials going into subsequent players' turns, which I thought was cool. What you're doing effectively through all of this is your standard Euro fare. You're collecting resources, using those resources to build buildings, which leads to the second half of the game. You're kind of assembling your little city, sort of Alhambra or suburbia style, by lining up your buildings adjacent to each other. By creating little districts of 2x2 squares, you can get a lot of points at the end of the game by sort of abandoning one of your workers, placing them in that district, re-triggering the building's special powers, and then there's a way to multiply the points values from those. So that's kind of the large bulk of your end of game scoring, is the way your districts give you victory points throughout the game, the way that they give you victory points at the end of the game, and then there is one final mechanic that kind of revolves around just being ahead of other players on this sort of attack track that you want to try keep up with other players for. And that's kind of the gist of it. It's also not an especially complicated game, but really quite a pleasant little puzzle of trying to find the optimal time to get new dice, when it's appropriate to add new dice to your pool, when it's appropriate to spend them, when it's appropriate to use the resources, like I said, in order to just get ahead of the curve and bump up those dials to the point that other players can't use them. Quite fun, quite pleasant. Nothing about it really blew me away, but it also has a very pleasing production to it in a way that I thought worked really well. It's maybe a touch longer than it ought to be. It gets closer to the 2-hour realm at 4 players, but had a good time with Origins First Builders.
So like Cryo, I'm looking at Origins First Builders here on BGG, some of the pictures here, and you said that it's not super heavy, not super complicated, but there does seem to be, and again, like Cryo, there are a lot of pieces, a lot of things going on in this game. In terms of table presence alone, which I agree with you, the table presence does look great.
Yeah.
These pictures make it look very, very pretty. But it does seem to be very fiddly, very complicated, a lot of like literally gears moving.
Yeah, I would say that probably looks worse than it feels in practice, because there are basically 5 main sections to the board, and all of them are really, really simple. Like I would say like a quarter of the board is devoted to these 3 tracks, which are basically just tracks you move up, where they have 1 power associated with each of them. The worker placement spots are exceedingly easy to explain. And then I would say what is probably the hardest to parse in practice is there's a steady rotation of 5 buildings that are out, and they all have, power text on them. So there's a fair bit of that getting up, peering over down the building, seeing what they all do, which is, I would say, the biggest thing that slows the game down a little bit, is just keeping in mind all the powers that are available to you. But yeah, no, I wouldn't say that it's especially complex at all. I think especially if you've played any of the dice placement games, that this is going to feel the most familiar to, something like a Coimbra, it's in that sort of weight, that realm, like a fairly medium Euro.
But it's quite a bit heavier than Cryo.
Yes, I would say that for sure.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. For some reason, didn't realize this was half sci-fi, half Civ builder.
Yeah, well, because it doesn't really
mixture.
have that outward appearance. The 5 dials are motherships, so there you go. There's your sci-fi theme.
Perfect.
That is Origins First Builders.
Before we get to our feature topic, we did want to just plug our Patreon. It's not something we do super often, but you can get bonus episodes of the Board Game Barrage podcast at patreon.com/BoardGameBarrage or BoardGameBarrage.com/Patreon. And this month for January, we are going to be doing a little retrospective on our top 50 and games that didn't make the cut or were cut from last year's list. It means the world to us, and the show can only go on with you, the patron supporters. So if you're already supporting, thank you so much. And if you are interested or so inclined, please go ahead and check that out at BoardGameBarrage.com/Patreon. This is a dramatic pause. But we don't have time for that. This has got to be under an hour mark. Remember that.
That's right.
And don't edit out the part where I seem powerful in connection to you.
I'll try not to. I always do, but this time I'll try not to.
That's right. And today, here we are, our featured topic. We are going to be talking about power in board games. So I want to kick us off just with a discussion of some games that we wanted to highlight that make us feel powerful. Anyone want to go first?
For me, when I think about games that make me feel powerful, there is one game that jumps to mind every time, and it's funny because it's not necessarily even one of my favorite games, but Russian Railroads. I don't know if you guys have ever played this, but Russian Railroads is a sort of worker placement game where you can really, really ramp up your scoring. So every round of Russian Railroads, you have the opportunity to score, and in the first couple rounds of Russian Railroads, you're scoring 4 points, 5 points, 6 points, whatever. And one of my most vivid memories of playing Russian Railroads is in the later rounds, you're just whipping around the scoring track, whereas you're just moving incrementally in the first couple rounds. In the later rounds of Russian Railroads, you're like making full circuits around the scoring track. And there is a very strong sense of like, I've really built up this engine and literally, we're playing Russian Railroad. So it's like literally that engine and you're just scoring tons of points at the end. And there's a very clear feeling of like accomplishment and of building in that game. Unlike any I've ever played, really.
I think that's probably the easiest way to feel powerful in a game, which is like near the end of the game, or like, look at what I can do when I, at the beginning of the game, wasn't even close. I think Le Havre for me is one where you do a lot at the end and you don't do very much at the beginning. I think other Uwe games don't do as much in that. In Agricola, like at the end, like I am doing more, but I'm still like in pain. Where in Le Havre, I'm like, wow, like I am a rich merchant and I've got every resource. Like I've got 70 of them in a Tupperware bag. And I think that's a really easy way for a game to make you feel powerful. And in fact, I think it's even a way that board games cheat.
Yeah, I
and
agree.
Make you feel like you are good.
Yeah.
When in fact you are not.
It's funny, Calvin, that you say that other Uves don't do this, because actually I had almost the exact point they just made, which is one thing that A Feast for Odin does is that it gives you a new worker every single round of the game. So there's this idea towards the end of the game that you're doing all of this stuff and you feel amazing, but you forget that you have like 3 times as many workers as you had back at the beginning. So it does feel like a cheat, but it's an effective one.
Yeah, that's really funny. It's almost like I felt the same about video games that are like roguelike or roguelite, I don't know my terminology, where each time you restart the game, you're a little bit stronger. And that is almost a one-to-one replacement for getting good at the game. Now you have more health, and now you have more magic. And so I think engine building to some degree allows you to feel that sense of progression without having actually progressed. And, in Agricola, a good Uwe Rosenberg game, you have to pay and have Uwe sex in order to have children. Uh-huh. Unlike A Feast for Odin, where it's just implied every round there's the sex.
It's just a nonstop orgy. I think another good example of what we're talking about, like deck builders are very much a version of engine building in the same way. And it kind of became like a running joke in our game group for the longest time when we were playing early games of Dominion, that there was the infamous player Dan, who is very good at having turns of Dominion that feel like infinite engines, where he's just playing 1 billion cards, and he's very carefully constructed his deck so he gets to the point that he gets actions and draws enough that he can basically mill out his whole deck. And that, I mean, I don't have any personal experience of that feeling powerful, but it looked powerful to watch him do it. So I feel like deck builders lean into that a lot, where if you're like refining and building on what you're able to do compared to what you had in your pathetic starter deck at the start. The one example I can think of that I do like a lot, which is only technically a deck builder, is Automobiles, which, is more correctly a bag builder, which is pretty much the same thing. But again, at later rounds of Automobiles, you're just like whizzing through that track, especially when stuff like lines up really, really well and you just get the perfect combination of cubes to just move yourself halfway around the race course when you're just inching and creeping forward at the beginning of the game.
It's funny, the other bag builder, the other one, there's only 2 in the world, Quacks of Jan Quedlinburg. The rat is a big cheat as well, right? Because you could start on space 7 and you're like, wow, I've got to 24 this time. And it's like, well, yeah, you started literally halfway up the track, like even though your bag has progressed. Right. Let's pivot. One that I really wanted to bring up, and it may relate to my own player profile, is I love, and I feel so powerful. I just feel so powerful when I cancel Canceling makes me feel like a god. Okay, so let's talk about Cosmic Encounter, one of the greatest board games of all time that's been there since the 60s, the 70s. They keep redoing it because it's so good. And it has Card Zap. And Card Zap is literally just a card. Well, all the cards in the game say use on them. And so when someone does that, you go, nah, Card Zap. Nah, that's not happening. And it's just so good. And so that repeats itself for me in other games in my top 10, right? You've got I'm the Boss, which has these 10 I'm the Boss cards. Literally, you can argue for 30 minutes and then go, nah, I'm the boss. And it's just all over. And like that moment, no one knows you have it. And suddenly you're the boss. Inish, right, has the Geist card that just seeing it, I'm just like, ugh, I got to get that because I got to have the power. Even if I don't use it, I'm the only one that can negate things. And I think that for whatever reason, there's the combination here with the power. And I don't know what this says about me as a human being. It's the combination of being able to tell someone no, and they don't know that it's about to happen. So I'm squeamish with the power. Like, I know that I've got the power, and then when I unleash that, it's just probably one of my favorite moments in all of board gaming is canceling things.
It's funny because my experience with a lot of that type of play is in something like Magic the Gathering, where it does feel good to be the person that is, the blue player with the counter spells. And that does feel like its own form of power. But I was never that person, so I was always just annoyed at people that had those decks. But Magic...
Power corrupts, Neil.
The power does corrupt. Magic the Gathering is actually one of the examples I'd pick as a really good example of this sort of thing as well. And not just in the counter spells, but because the nature of what you have in your hand is unpredictable at any given moment, and then you splash down something on your turn, and it could be this incredible game-changing card, or this big creature, or like the interrupt at just the right time, whether it's like a counter spell or the spell that zaps someone else's creature. Like those moments in Magic where you're surprising someone with the thing that you have in your hand at the most opportune time is what I love about deck construction games in general.
Absolutely.
Another facet of gaming where I sort of feel powerful is games that feel very restrictive, games where you feel like you have to fight for every inch. And that can make for games where you don't feel that at all. Like a game that springs to mind when I think of that is a new release Furnace. Furnace is an engine builder, but even at the end of Furnace, all you feel is slightly more efficient. You don't have a sense of like, wow, I've built this like amazing engine that's put in this and I get 15 or whatever. Mm-hmm. But a game where I do get that sense of power that is very, very tight is a game that I think if we were doing our top 50 now would be on my list is La Granja. La Granja is a game that is super, super tight. One of the main ways that you score in La Granja is by making these deliveries, and the amount of deliveries you have through the course of the entire game is quite small. I think you may have something like 20, 25 deliveries throughout the course of the entire game of La Granja. And in the first round or two, your ability to get the resources to make the deliveries is very, very difficult. So you're making 1 or 2 deliveries, maybe 3 or 4 in those first couple rounds. And even in the last round, you're not making that many. You may be able to get, say, in the best circumstance, you may be able to make like 8 deliveries in that last round. But the thing that I love about it is you really have to plan things out in order to get yourself maximization at the end of the game. So La Granja, when you have that final round of La Granja where you're just like making your deliveries right at the right time, you've timed everything right, you know you're going to get the resources that you need to make these deliveries, and there's very, very little wiggle room generally in a game of La Granja. Even when you're doing very well, one resource short here, 1 coin short there is going to ruin your plan. So when you're able to make all those pieces fit together in a game that is that tight and just have these like really high scoring rounds is really, really satisfying. Really makes me feel like I've really set the thing up. I'm going to have a big splashy turn for a game that's not splashy at all.
Okay. We've got some problems here. One, first of all, this game is on Kickstarter right now. Mark, would I like the game?
La Granja?
Yeah.
I think so. It feels Agricola-y to me, that tightness.
Yeah. Because it does kind of seem like what you're saying is that the game rewards careful planning, and so you feel powerful when you're smart and you do smart things in the game. So you're basically saying that a game that lets you feel smart makes you feel powerful.
A game that justifiably rewards me for how well I play.
For being in Mensa?
Right, exactly. So, I get my just desserts.
I just want to make sure because, I brought up getting a random card in a deck, and you said...
Solving a Rubik's Cube makes me feel powerful. There's also like the very superficial side of this, right? Because I can't help but think something like a Cthulhu Wars, right? Where a lot of the game is building up to that moment where you put down your giant piece on the board. And like that is part and parcel of what Cthulhu Wars is. Those moments feel big. They make you feel powerful. But it's also so baked into, like I said, on the superficial surface level of the game, the big giant miniature, that I wonder how you guys feel about that. Does that feel like something that does make you feel powerful, or is it just like the expected powerful course of the game?
I think it does. It does for me, certainly. And I will be the first to say meh to Peterson Games, their Kickstarter model, and how insane this production is. But when you're the only person with a great old one on the board, it's like, they're 2 levels down from you. Oh, you got some little acolytes. Like my great old one is yay big. But conversely, it also does help when you're looking across the board and you're like, I ain't going over there because that guy is huge.
Right.
That is a huge person, and I'm staying completely on the other side of the world from that person. But I do think it lends itself, because some of the great old ones have powers that are really hard to even pull off.
Sure.
So it's just the presence of them strikes fear into the heart of the people that you play.
Agree 100%.
The superficial, Nealon, perfect segue. Have either of you played Nothing Personal?
I don't think so.
And Mark, don't even start. Oh, I played Kremlin, the game that it's based on. I saw it in your eyes. Did I see it in your eyes?
You did see my eyes. I have not played Nothing Personal.
Well, that is a crying shame because it was designed by none other than Mr. Vassal of the Dice Tower. And in Nothing Personal, there's a gangster negotiation type thing. The capo, I think I'm saying that right, but I say La Granja and Cryo. So who knows if I know how to pronounce words. If you are the capo, not only do you break ties and get to go first, but you're actually given a capo ring that I can't really wear because I have fat fingers, okay? Can't wear this ring, but you can literally put it on your pinky, and you're like, when a tie comes up, what do you think I'm going to do? I'm not going to say out loud to Nealon that I break the tie. I'm just going to show him. I'm going to hold up my hand like a capo. And that definitely makes me feel powerful.
I feel like more games should have accessories just built into them to show up your status.
Yeah, I love that about Nothing Personal.
So I want to talk about a different type of power in games, and I fear what it will reveal about myself and not the two of you. One of the ways that board games make me feel powerful is when I can exact pain onto the people that I'm playing with. So let's be specific. A game that I had a great time playing over the holiday break with my family was The Downfall of Pompeii. And I don't know if either of you played this one?
Yeah.
We didn't cover this on the show.
No, we have not.
Okay, and in the second half of the game, everyone gets to do this, so it isn't like some individual power that you have, but you draw a volcano tile, and then you get to choose within a limited range where that goes, and everyone on that tile just dies. Literally, lava comes out, it dies. It has to be orthogonally adjacent to a lava line, and it's literally like, well, there's 4 of my father's pieces, or 1 of mine. Guess all of my dad's pieces are dying, and then the lava goes over them.
And you literally throw them in volcano, right?
That's right. You literally pick them up, throw them in the volcano. How could a game be more fun than that?
It could not. That's great.
What I'm saying is what makes it feel powerful to me is the pain upon which I'm inflicting on the other players.
Right. It's watching other people suffer where you feel like you're strongest.
Because I'll even sacrifice some of my own dudes. If I can get 4 or 5 of them and me, okay, that's fine. I don't care. I did that in Cryo.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, it does remind me of that, where like some of the biggest moves in that game kind of felt like, okay, 5 pods are burning and like, this is it. You can't stop it.
I will say that the structure of Cryo actually inspired this topic, which is to say that I did not feel an overwhelming sense of power throughout the game. I felt that things were very incidental, or as your engine built, you then had to use your vehicles to land stuff in the cavern, and then those vehicles were gone. So it was a little more like this loop, but that action that we're talking about does strike some of that same Downfall of Pompeii kind of moment.
One of the things I thought was interesting about this topic is also sort of visiting an example of a game that gets close, but for whatever reason doesn't quite deliver on the same feeling.
Oh, yeah.
And Spirit Island is actually, weirdly enough, a good example of this for me, because I think Spirit Island, the whole premise is exactly that. You're getting more and more powerful. And I think that is very effective for the first couple of times you play it. But one of the things I find not frustrating, because I still like the arc about Spirit Island, but it's so baked into the game. It's so core to the idea that you will get powerful over the course of it, that the arc feels baked into the structure into the way that feels inevitable. Like, you start to realize, like, okay, I'm just gonna bide my time until I'm more powerful. It doesn't feel as splashy as like, okay, now suddenly I'm doing this thing. But on the flip side, the one thing it does do really well is because every spirit in Spirit Island is completely asymmetric, you do feel like you're exerting your power in a very specific way. Like, if you're the spirit that is using the oceans to your advantage, you're the person that is like dominating that like region of the map versus how other people are able to exert their power. And I think that's one of the things that asymmetry does especially well, is it allows people to like exercise power in different ways that allows them like some ownership over parts of the game that other people don't have. So like Gaia Project and Terra Mystica, for example, where even though it's a very, very Euro game, like the way that every faction is able to like so strongly manipulate one specific aspect of the game uniquely does feel powerful. It kind of feels like, oh, hey, I have control of this. I'm the one that's able to do this. Everyone else get wrecked, you know?
And I don't even think, in terms of asymmetry, one of my favorite games, Dominant Species, the factions are asymmetric, but they're not like splashily asymmetric. There's just a little bit of a bonus, but it does feel like a huge difference. And I think maybe for Dominant Species, some of the games you mentioned, the theming helps, but like I'm the birds in Dominant Species and I can move faster and you know, I'm the mammals and I can adapt better. And so it's, even though asymmetry is in some ways like incremental, there's just a little bit of bonus. It does feel, when mixed along with the theme, with the fact that you're a different kind of species, it does make you feel like, okay, I'm the reptiles. Right. Like I'm doing this. This is my thing.
Right. I'm also just suddenly reminded of like Voyages of Marco Polo, right? Where in some ways that's like the high point of explaining the game is like, I have this ability and no one else does.
Right. Exactly.
It does feel powerful.
It's funny because I don't believe that asymmetry on the face of it makes me feel powerful. I think when you can cheat the rules, that's like a small moment that does. But I'm trying to think of good examples where the asymmetry actually frustrates me more than makes me feel powerful. There's a faction in Cthulhu Wars, and to a lesser degree, maybe even the Cats in Root, where you start from a position of power, and then the whole game is just you getting the beat out of you, and you have to sort of like hold on to that. I hate that. That is my least favorite thing, even though it's balanced. Like these games are balanced, but for whatever reason, it's not asymmetry on its own that makes me feel that way. It's really when someone has a fundamental rule for me that just cracks the game and everyone looks at you and says that couldn't be possible, that really becomes more pronounced to have that feeling of power. So the last question that will wrap up this discussion, I would just like to ask both of you, is feeling powerful in a game something that you actively are seeking out or think about when you're playing modern board games?
It is for me. And this is a game I just mentioned, but this was brought in like the most stark relief in playing Furnace, because I'd heard a lot of good things about Furnace, and in playing it, it's a well-designed game. But the fact that I just didn't feel like I was like doing anything big or I had like advanced really knocked the game a few notches for me. And so it really brought that to bear. And when we're discussing this topic, when I was thinking about games that made me feel powerful, it did bring out feelings of excitement and joy and fond memories. So it is something that I think is important to me when considering games.
I would say that it's not something I actively seek out. Like, I think like anyone, I do love the moments that do.
No one man should have all that power.
Exactly. I like the moments when they happen. You know, like I do like that feeling of it, but like for me, I kind of find more joy in it feeling a little bit more organic. I think closer to like kind of what Mark was saying earlier in the episode, like those feelings where it's like more of your machinations than something that the game has explicitly designed into its core feels better to me.
Interesting. Though I don't know that those are binary.
No, right? I don't
like,
think that's even a mutually exclusive proposition, because like you can be the game that's built like, let's say Innovation, for example, that has these cards that are like,
say it for me.
They have these cards that feel very, very strong together, like these beautiful combos, but they're there by design. It's not an accident that these cards bounce off each other in such fantastic ways. It is core to the design, but it still makes you feel like, oh, I found this, you know? That feels better to me.
Yes. I think that this is essential for me when playing board games, and for whatever reason, as I've described, like the card game flavor of it really becomes pronounced for me, and that is across like Chudiak's entire lineup, whether we're talking about like Impulse, Glory to Rome, Matai, or Innovation, where when you compare the powers of a cards in like Cryo compared to Innovation or Glory to Rome, it's just they're not even in the same echelon of how powerful you feel when you get to do them. And to whatever degree, Chudiak's games, Classic Carl, his games have ruined a lot of those other power combo-y kind of games for me because of how good the Chudiak games make me feel. It also feels like power has this relationship to relative position. And so for me, like when I'm exerting power, someone else is getting got. And so it's an emphasis or a element of the socialness of the game. And that's not all versions of power, because I think there is, like, I've gotten better, I'm scoring more or whatever, but sometimes it's in contrast to someone else that power really becomes pronounced. So for me, I do feel like it is a like quintessentially important part or component of the board gaming experience. But what do you listeners think? We would love examples of games that make you feel powerful or big and splashy moments that you have in board games. You can email those to us at boardgamebarrage@gmail.com. You can join the Discord and chat with thousands of other board gamers at boardgamebarrage.com/Discord. You can find us on Twitter, on Instagram, on Facebook, or on our BGG Guild. Thank you so much for listening to the podcast. As always, thank you to Heart Society Music for the song What's on Your Mind, Kid, from their album Wake the Queens. And that is going to do it for this show. Good night.
Goodbye.
Bye.
And all the things that means. Games that make you feel powerful, actions in games that make you feel powerful, and I have this written out much better than I just said it here. Maybe not. Marker. We'll probably cut that. We'll probably cut that, but you think?
Can we also acknowledge that Callan is saying it weird?
Nope. At no point can we do that. Moving on. Neelan?